Hello and welcome to Climate Change Roundtable. See, usually I start by saying we are live. I haven't been here in a while, everyone. I just got over COVID, which admittedly was horrible, but we are live. And hello and welcome to Climate Change Roundtable. I am your semi-regular host, Andy Singer. And joining me today are the more usual guests than me who have not recently had COVID. We'll start with Linnea Lueken. Linnea, how are you? Welcome back to the show. Really welcome.
I'm doing great. I've got to move in a month, so that's why my background is starting to look more and more barren as the time goes on, as I pack stuff away to try to get ahead of it. But
I'm just impressed that you're packing a month ahead of time. That is way outside of my purview. Anthony Watts joining as usual. Anthony, how are you?
Well, good. I'm basically enjoying life outside of California, hassle-free and less tax and all that good stuff.
Yeah, us here in Illinois, we do not relate to that less tax, statement. It's pretty brutal here. Actually, for the Illinois people watching, they're thinking about like redoing Soldier Field where the Chicago Bears play, and they were saying it might be $1.5 billion taxpayer subsidy, which is absurd.
Speaking of which, California is now up to $1.48 in taxes and fees for every gallon of gas.
Seriously?
Oh my god. It's
gosh.
Nuts.
That's insane.
But it's the oil company's fault.
Oh, I love this comment from Jim Lakely. Yes, I very much agree, Mr. Lakely. We are very glad that I am back. And Sterling Burnett. Sterling, thank you for joining the show as usual. How you doing?
Good to see you. Glad you're recovering from COVID. By the way, I'm quite convinced you didn't get it from me.
I probably not, unless COVID is, transformed and now has the ability to infect each other over the interwebs. There is such thing as a computer virus. I'm not sure if COVID is one of those yet, but I guess that would.
I saw a Dilbert cartoon where the pointy-haired boss indicated to his staff that if they kept sending messages they'd get monkeypox through the computer. So,
I'm gonna be honest. I don't know much about monkeypox.
I think you can get COVID from watching CNN myself.
I don't know about that, but depression can certainly set in.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
I mean, I'm convinced people that don't pay any attention to the news are happier people. But for those of us that are paying attention to the news, what is currently being talked about right now is how Biden is depleting the U.S. strategic oil reserve. Specifically, there's a story going on right now, and let me go ahead and share my screen here. Probably should have done this ahead of time, didn't, so doing it now. All right, so this comes from Reuters. They put out a report, I believe, on Tuesday that essentially said that in June, the Biden administration exported 5 million barrels of oil overseas, specifically, and then recently to China, nonetheless. I don't know. Have you all been seeing this story going on just about how
it's going? It's viral, you might say.
Yeah, right.
A lot of my friends on Facebook that have been talking about the story, the common theme with their reaction has been WTF.
Seriously. Well, yeah. I mean, so the point is, they've been saying they were gonna release about 1 million barrels of oil per day from the Strategic Oil Reserve, and the Strategic Oil Reserve is essentially, spare oil that we keep in case of natural disasters or national security interests, or probably not really bad energy policy, but that's what it seems to be going towards right now.
Numbers.
It's a double whammy. It's supposed to be a strategic oil reserves, meaning it's supposed to benefit the United States, number one, and it's supposed to be in a time of crisis or war or intense need. Yeah. It's not an enemy's oil reserve. So why the hell are they sending it to China?
It's not to manipulate gasoline prices, which is what Biden originally did it for. I'm going to get gasoline price. That's not what it's there for. It's look, if you go to war, or if your foreign supplies, it was created when we were importing a lot more oil than we are today. Yeah. If foreign suppliers cut you off, we've got reserves. It's for us. Now, to be fair, Biden did promise to provide oil and gas to Europe during this crisis with the war in Ukraine that Russia is waging. So I don't begrudge some of that oil going to Europe. But why a state-owned oil company in China, which Hunter Biden, I'm sure completely coincidentally, set up a company that bought a more than $1 billion stake in. He's a co-partner. Why it got 1 million barrels of oil, I question highly.
Yeah, let me go ahead.
in court, they talk about it's not just impropriety, it's the appearance of impropriety. I don't know if anything wrong there. There are a list of companies that are allowed by law to buy oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And for some reason, a state-owned oil company from China is on that list. But even still, the government can still decide who goes first and who gets oil. They don't have to sell to that company. They're just allowed to. And Biden and company sold to China rather than put it on our market.
I'm going to take a step back here and just read a bit from this story. So those of us that aren't totally in the know on it can just kind of get a background here. So this comes from Reuters, as I said, and just reading, Reuters reported that crude oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was headed to India and the Netherlands, as well as China. According to an April press release from the U.S. Department of Energy, a contract to buy nearly 1 million barrels was awarded to Unipec America Incorporated, the trading arm of the state-owned China Petrochemical Corporation, commonly known as Sinopec. As the conservative Washington Free Beacon recently noted, Hunter Biden, the president's son, has previously had ties to Sinopec, a private equity firm he co-founded, he being Hunter Biden. Bohai Harvest RST, not sure if I pronounced that right. Sorry, Bohai, if I did. Purchased a $1.7 billion stake in Sinopec marketing in 2014. So yeah, essentially we Americans are dealing with insane gas prices and energy prices here, domestically. And then we're releasing oil from the Strategic Reserve and selling it to a Chinese company, a Chinese state-owned company, big difference, that Hunter Biden has ties to. All the while Biden, his position is that I never talk to my son about business dealings. Well, I mean, if that's true, then, great coincidence for them. I'm guessing it's not true. Linnea, when you saw this being you worked on an oil rig and all that, what are your thoughts on just all of this just insanity going on?
Well, at first I thought that what they were talking about was the fact that Chinese firms have been buying up a lot of the, promised oil sales going forward, or a lot of the contracts for exports. But this is not that. This is, I'm not sure how regularly this kind of thing happens, but I do think it's very strange to take oil out of the strategic reserves. And, they say that it's to decrease the price, but once that oil is used, that supply influx just goes away. So, it's not like you have a promised future supply that can come out of the strategic reserve that is going to make any kind of substantial difference to an oil price. It's just not enough. So, it's kind of gross, right? Because it's obviously just Biden is releasing oil not to decrease the price of oil, but to try to nudge his numbers in the polling.
So it's a political move.
Yeah, to make the appearance of trying to help. And then, he goes on the campaign trail or whatever it is that he's been doing lately, saying that people that own gasoline stations need to take a hit on their profits so that, oil prices can be low, or gas prices can be lower. And it's their patriotic duty to operate at a loss so that gas is more affordable.
Evidently, evidently it's Biden's patriotic duty to supply oil to China.
Yeah.
It's like, look, ultimately we're going to have to replenish this supply. So we're going to have to buy this back later. Let's hope at lower prices than today. But more importantly, this is completely a political move, and it's not a long-term fix for our oil and energy supply issues. Biden has created a mess. He has,
putting it mildly,
he's fostered a situation that encouraged Russia to go into Ukraine, in part by approving their Nord Stream 2 pipeline and saying they should ship more oil and gas to Europe, and by cutting off our domestic supplies, by stopping lease sales, by banning sales that were already approved in Alaska, by blocking pipelines from allies. Keystone XL, as far as I know, we're not real competitors with Canada. We're allies. Which would have delivered as much oil to the U.S. daily, almost as much as he's releasing from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, as and other pipelines. He's putting up roadblocks. He's making it harder for oil companies to get financing because he says we're going to shut you down in 10 years, but go out and go out and try and get financing for a project that will take 30 years to pay back. So everything he's done has harmed the energy industry. Harming the energy industry has hurt every other sector of the economy except for wind and solar, his friends in the wind and solar industry, who he was meeting with rather than oil companies while he was complaining about oil companies not doing their patriotic duty. And then he wants to blame our companies for the mess that he created. And he continues to create daily.
I think that based on all the hot air that comes out of Washington, I think they should set up a strategic wind reserve.
Well, and
just capture that, put it in the ground, and power those turbines later.
Oh man!
Well, I want to mention just a quick fact, real quick, that I really don't think that people know is just how slim the margins are at gasoline stations on the kind of money that they make. So some people do know this. I didn't know this until maybe last year when COVID started to hit. But grocery stores make about a 3% margin of profit. Gas stations are like 1.5% to 2%.
Yep, the government makes far more money on taxes than gas stations or the petroleum producers.
So maybe they get rid of gas taxes. Maybe they do all that kind of thing. But asking gas stations to just decrease the price. Why can't you just decrease the price? Well, all right.
Yeah, like the small margins we have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Funny. Well, not really funny. More. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. Ninth Orwellian. Is that in Illinois, if you buy gas on your receipt, it'll say like, you aren't paying a gas tax thanks to Governor J.B. Pritzker, which is, it's election season. And he's able to like literally put this on all of our receipts. I mean, that's just, I don't know what adjective to choose, but it's frightening.
Before he was blaming the gas stations themselves, he was blaming refiners that were running at more than 90% capacity. We haven't built a new refinery since the 70s, and because of government regulations, because of NIMBYism, not in my backyard. But we've closed a lot of refineries because of clean air rules. So we have less refining capacity, and they're running at full capacity. But Biden blames the refineries.
Yeah,
it's sort of ludicrous. It's crazy that he keeps getting away with this, and the media allows him to. Though, to be fair, this story in Reuters, I think they're starting to catch on. They're starting to play a little bit more honestly in the corporate media.
So I do want to play a clip from Biden's press secretary. Let's see if I get her name right. Karine Jean-Pierre. I think I got that right. When she was asked on Tuesday about this report from Reuters. So let me go ahead and just share that on screen real quick. All right.
And then there's a Reuters report out this morning that says that more than 5 million barrels of oil that were released from the emergency oil reserves were exported to Europe and Asia last month. And some of it reportedly was actually heading to China. Is the administration aware of those reports? And does the president mind that some of this oil that was meant to ease pain for consumers is headed overseas?
I have not seen that report, so I would honestly have to go look into it and see what the truth is in that statement that you just laid out, and see exactly what's happening. I just have not seen that report.
Well, and there we have the official position. We don't even know about this, so. Yeah. It's kind of hard to, argue for or against when their position is just, we're not even aware, which is kind of crazy.
No, it was more than that. It was, we're not even aware, and we're not sure it's true.
Yeah, that's fair point.
I mean, that she basically said, you could be lying, so we don't know. Now, of course, Biden himself, he wasn't sitting there at the cash register selling the oil.
No.
But one of his officials was. They approve every individual sale to every individual company who buys it, and they approved sale to China, not just a Chinese oil company, to a Chinese state-owned oil company. So
that Hunter
that's-
Biden has a
that Hunter
financial
Biden
interest in,
has
yeah.
connection. Yeah.
They basically just they pushed this question aside as if they didn't know because they don't want to answer the hard questions. That's all that was about.
Yeah, but so I did watch basically that entire press conference looking for that clip, and it is amazing how many things if she's like backed into a corner on something, she'll just say like, "Oh, we've decided to not address that question as an administration." It's like, how are you allowed to do this? Like, whenever something actually pressing, you're just allowed to say, "Ah, no, we're not feeling that one." But all right, moving on. I mean, we could kind of hammer this all day, and I think the overarching point here is just that. Actually, so when I said moving on and now I'm moving backwards, but it is that essentially the Biden administration is using the strategic reserves for A, political gain, and then B, to try to deal with the bad domestic energy policy that they put in place. I mean, they completely neutered our domestic oil production, our capabilities as a nation, and now we're going towards OPEC. We're using the strategic reserves and we're exporting it to China and Europe. So I do want to make that clear that that's my main takeaway from the article. I believe most of you would agree with that.
Yeah, another thing that Biden and company claim, let's just talk about all the different blame. They say, oh, well, we don't need to offer new leases because there are 9,000 leases that haven't been developed. Why don't they get on those? Well, you got 6,000 permits sitting before Biden. It's not enough to buy a lease. You have to go through the environmental impact statement and the process of getting your permit approved by the federal government. And 6,000 have been sitting on his desk since the beginning.
He's not only that, but
he's slow walking those permits, and then he's blaming them for not drilling on the releases that they have. So.
And not only that, but just because you get a lease, like a block lease, doesn't mean that it's actually productive block. A lot of these blocks that are out there, they actually just use them for, and my area is in offshore, so mostly what I know about is there. But I'm sure they do this on land too. But a lot of the property that they lease is for water injection, which is putting back pressure on the formation so that you can increase your production curve from other wells in the same field. So it's not necessarily that there's oil that they are going to get out of the ground in every single one of these leases, and they've proved it already and they're going to go get it. No, a lot of this is an exploration thing, or they're using it for water injection, or they're just holding on to it in order to make sure that other companies can't come and drill on a nearby location and mess up their formation pressure. I mean,
well, and also if you've got a lease, you want to keep a steady flow. So it's like, look, as my other wells decline, I'm going to develop new wells. But you've got to have financing for those new wells. You've got to have financing for all those leases that we've purchased. And right now, they're having a hard time getting financing. And that is on Biden. He says, we're going to shut them down in 10 years. Well, these things take time to pay back. And what bank is going to loan you money if they think in 8 years or less, you'll be out of business?
Well, and this is what, and that's what Nikki just said in the
comments. That's why I'm showing it on screen.
But this is a term that's been thrown around a lot recently, is manage the decline. And it really does feel like that because, the Biden administration goes up in front of the people on television and says, oh, we're doing everything we can to decrease the prices, do this. Meanwhile, everything that they're actually doing behind the scenes is contributing to increases in gas prices and in the cost of energy. Germany is having issues where they're asking people to not run hot water. They're cutting off certain amounts of electricity over there because they just don't have a reliable supply of energy. They're cutting people off. They're telling people that they're not allowed to plug in a hot tub or something. And high energy pulling appliances. So it's a total mess everywhere right now. And that's why I think that term is being thrown around, because it really does feel like they're forcing their ideas on what the global energy system should look like, regardless of the detriment to, the average lifestyle.
Yeah. I mean, part of the reason they're able to get away with this kind of thing is that the corporate media and big tech in general do completely have the backs of I don't want to just say the Biden administration. I would more like to say either I don't know, the deep state or climate alarmists in general. And Linnea, I know that you actually wrote a story about this week, in that LinkedIn permanently banned a scientist for presenting, as you say, inconvenient truths about CO2. By the way, I love the picture you got here for this.
I worked really hard on that meme.
Did you really? Nice.
I did.
But yeah, so I mean, you wrote about this. Do you want to give a brief rundown of what happened here and why Gregory Wrightstone was permanently banned from LinkedIn?
Yeah, so a little bit of context. Wrightstone is actually a certified reviewer for the IPCC. So he's what people would call a climate change expert. He's one of the experts that they would reference all the time. He's got a master's, I think, in geology. And what he used to do on his LinkedIn account that gained a lot of following, tens of thousands of followers, was that he would just post data sets and interesting facts about climate change and the context of CO2 in the atmosphere from a geologic perspective. And this point of view in particular, LinkedIn came in and decided that this is unacceptable content on the platform. This is LinkedIn, by the way. This isn't like Twitter or Facebook or some goofy website like that. This is supposed to be a professional networking website where you're supposed to be able to show the kind of research that you've been doing. And basically, LinkedIn told him, I think the wording was, this is unacceptable content or something like that.
Yeah. They're geological epic deniers.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's the thing is, first he was penalized last year in October for his post. And these posts, if you look at the graphics, if you look at his post, they're all referenced. They're from peer-reviewed literature and or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's their own statements. And when he posts it and he points out that their own statements undermines the narrative that humans are causing catastrophic warming, they say, this is what they say, and says, you can draw your own conclusions. He was banned. They just let him back on. He posted something else that was peer reviewed, their own statements. He didn't make the chart. The chart was in the document, and then they banned him permanently. So he is banned. Evidently, I forget what the statement was.
It's actually up here at the top. It says, thanks for contacting us. Your account has violated the LinkedIn user agreement and professional community policies. Due to the number and or severity of these violations, this was a very severe violation. This account has been permanently restricted.
Yeah, evidently, you tell the truth, and the truth is a severe violation. And then it got worse.
Their truth. That's the problem.
And then it got, to be fair, Al Gore said, you don't have your own truth. There is the truth, and this is the truth. So they're not following Al Gore either.
It's not an accurate belief.
Yeah, it's not an accurate. There you go. And it's worse. It gets worse because when the CO2 coalition, CO2 coalition, which he heads up, which is basically manned by prominent climate scientists, top climate scientists around the globe. They posted a thing on Facebook defending him and saying, look what LinkedIn does. And then Facebook pulled it down and said, you couldn't do this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that, and I'm not going to name any names here, but there are certain publishers that we regularly work with who won't post anything we have related to climate change, because Facebook will see that you post about climate change and then devalue all content you have, even if it's totally unrelated, just by posting about it. And again, don't name any names here because we're friendly with these people. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge problem. Big tech is moving against climate realism in general. I had no idea LinkedIn was part of this, though. I kind of assumed LinkedIn was just a business platform.
In my opinion, LinkedIn is not really a good forum to discuss anything. It's basically a contact system. Basically, it's virtual business cards. And so I've always found LinkedIn pretty much worthless and annoying anyway, because they spam you to death with all kinds of stuff. Hey, so and so, you did this and that and whatever, and it's like, I don't care. So I don't even bother with LinkedIn anymore, even though I've got an account on it, because it's just not really the right kind of venue to discuss anything relevant. It's just basically a business trading card platform.
Well, and it's funny. There's a surprising number of people who watch this show who have reached out to me on LinkedIn and, send a comment through there and stuff. It's kind of a funny platform, but also that's like the only place you can find me anyway. So that's where I am. But I used to use LinkedIn a lot more, but I kind of stopped using it after, I think it was 9, 10, maybe a year ago, when they started asking you to put your pronouns on your account. And I was like, nope, I'm not playing that game. I am not doing that. If you guys, because I just know that they're going to kick me off if I do something funny with it. So
I like this comment. Linked out. That's not bad.
Yeah,
that's pretty good. All right. No, Anthony, you also posted a story this week. Wait, why? Every time I try to bring up your story, it keeps going back to LinkedIn. What is going on here?
Well, that's how they get you.
Yeah, right. I mean, LinkedIn's just taking over my. I keep trying to bring up your SEC story. I keep going right back to LinkedIn. All right, let's see. There we go. Anthony, you posted a story this week about the SEC climate rule, which I believe we've briefly touched on in the past, but it's important enough that we should definitely touch on again. Do you want to give a brief rundown of what's going on here?
Well, the Securities and Exchange Commission is proposing this idea that companies, all publicly traded companies, have to now start reporting their climate plans, basically how they're going to kowtow to the alarmist out there and create a carbon neutral company, and make sure that whatever we do, whether it's producing a product or a service, turns out to be carbon neutral so that we don't damage the earth with our evil profits. Anyway, so the SEC is proposing this, and one of the things that they said in their comments that they left on this, they had open comments at the SEC. If you'll scroll down a little bit, you'll see that they basically said the whole thing was absurd, and I have to agree with that. I mean, scroll down a little more.
Yep.
There we go. It's utter nonsense, said William Happer. Now, this is Dr. William Happer, and he's had decades of research into climate science and so forth. He's not a climate denier. He knows that climate changes. Everybody who's got any kind of a sense of this knows that climate changes. It's changed for millions of years. It's never static. It's only static maybe in our lifetimes, but in the long-term geologic thing, when you look at epochs like, our friend Gregory Wrightstone did, climate changes over the long term. It's natural for it to change. So when you go and look at what's happening today and compare it to the context of all these different geologic epochs, it is utter nonsense to say that we are in control of the planet and therefore we have to, do all these things. The bottom line is this: they've been caterwauling about climate change since 1978 or thereabouts, and there's been all of these, we've got to do something now. We have to act now. We have to change now. We have to stop this, so forth and so on. And none of it, not one bit of it, has made any difference. The carbon dioxide level continues to increase. It has gone unabated despite all of these different things that they have said we have to do. And it's going to continue that way because as far as humans go with the whole geologic view of things, we're just a speck in the whole, order of the planet.
Look, we've squandered, literally thrown good money after bad, hundreds of billions of dollars, and we're doing it every year, billions every year in the U.S. alone, much less globally, to halt something that we've not made a dent in, because the largest contributors right now are not even party to it. But even if they were, it wouldn't affect the climate. But getting back to Anthony's story is, regardless of that, the SEC has no role in climate change.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be protecting investors. And you know what? There are many companies that won't be impacted by climate change. And if companies think that climate change will materially affect their business, they would be required, but you can't say every company will be. They can't tell who will be impacted 50 and 100 years from now. The SEC can't, but neither can anyone else. And the SEC has gone beyond its bounds to say it's not just the publicly traded companies that we have some regulatory authority over that have to not only report their emissions, account for their emissions, report their emissions, and tell us what they're going to do to fight climate change. What if they just write back nothing?
Then I will buy their product.
That's their business. But more importantly, they've stepped beyond their legal bounds and said, you must account for the emissions throughout your supply chain. Guess what? They don't control any companies that aren't publicly traded. And many of the people and companies that are in supply chains for companies like, well, I won't name any names, but any big retailer, any big fast food company, the people in their supply chains aren't necessarily incorporated. So the SEC has no role whatsoever in regulating them. So they're trying to get it through the back door, saying the publicly traded company must act as big brother and force them to report and account for their emissions. That's against the law.
Well, they're talking about end use.
Yeah, they're talking about end use, but also we just had that Supreme Court decision we talked about last week, right? Yeah. If the EPA can't force utilities to cut greenhouse gases, it's very unclear to me what the standing of this rule of the SEC is to force every industry in the nation, every publicly traded company in the nation to account for and respond to climate change. They don't have that authority, and I suspect this will go the way of the Clean Power Plan.
Yeah, but they are going to try to get around it. There's a story in the New York Times today, which I don't have a link to, but basically the EPA has made a statement saying, well, we have figured out how to regulate this without dealing with CO2. So they're going to do an end run around the Supreme Court because their belief systems is we're more important than what the Supreme Court says. That's how a lot of people out there on the left are viewing this. And they are basically saying, there it is. They're figuring out how to do it. They're going to come up with another way to shut these things down because, their belief system is more important than clean power, or not clean power, but regular, reliable power and the Supreme Court. Those are their belief is more important than that. And the EPA itself really needs to get reined in. Yeah. I mean, they are out of control.
Yeah, and the basic system of government we have, limited powers, and the EPA isn't essentially a lawmaker doing it through quasi-regulation. But I'm agreeing with you is what I'm saying here. Yeah, but I had not seen this story yet. I'm amazed that they would actually come out and just say this outright. Well, that is remarkable, frankly.
It's not remarkable at all. I mean, the EPA, the court didn't say EPA couldn't regulate CO2 emissions. It said it couldn't do it the way they did it, which was try and force states to mandate no coal and natural gas and only they have to regulate inside the fence. Yeah. They have to use the powers that they're actually given if they think CO2 is a danger to human health and the environment. And that is efficiency upgrades, basically. And they have to be economic. So it's going to limit their power. They're going to regulate. They're going to regulate. There's no question about that. But the scope of their regulations and the impact of their regulations will not be nearly as severe as the Clean Power Plan would be. And of course, they've got to write the new rules. These will be challenged. There'll be a public comment period. They'll be challenged. And then we'll have some elections. And who knows what happens then.
Yeah, can't disagree with any of that. There's actually one more story I wanted to cover this week, and I know I said we weren't going to go too long today, but again, Linnea, this is from you, so you're hot this week. NPR spreads misinformation about climate change and models again. Now, this I thought was interesting because this story was about how essentially they could prove that any weather event is related to climate change. Am I getting that right? Or?
Yeah, and Anthony will definitely be someone to go to on this because he's been struggling
he does talk about this
forever. But my basic understanding is that what NPR and what a lot of these news science desks have been reporting is that suddenly scientists have now unlocked a way to tell you exactly what percentage of a weather event occurred due to anthropogenic or human-caused climate change, or because of the anthropogenic portion of climate change. Great. So what they're saying is you get a hurricane. They use Hurricane Harvey as an example a lot because there was an attribution study that came out shortly after that hurricane that said that the amount of rainfall with it was impossible without human-influenced climate change. But basically what they do is they formulate a model that is trying to construct a version of Earth's climate that exists without human intervention. So they create a model that doesn't exist of a climate that doesn't exist. And then they compare it to their version of what the climate is now, which is based on all of those awful scenario like pathways like RCP 8.5 and all of these models that are running way too hot. And then they compare those two models and they see what the difference is. And then they say, well, this difference here, because this hurricane happened in this model, but it didn't happen here, we think that it's caused by climate change. Well, neither model.
No. They don't say we think. They don't say we think.
We know.
They say it was caused by climate change.
Yeah.
And everything is caused by climate change.
Yeah.
Don't you know that? I mean, get with the program, people.
Yeah. So basically what they're doing is they have two not
imaginary
real models of climate. And they compare them, and the difference
Those aren't
is
the models.
the
That's Dr. Maui's output.
Okay.
Anyway, but yeah, Linnea's right.
Go ahead.
It's just to put it succinctly, after analyzing this article and the study, I call bullshit. It's just that simple. It's just that simple. They are trying to split hairs and just, it's unbelievable. And it's all because they have been trying for years, even though weather is not climate. Climate is an average of weather over 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So they're trying to make every weather event climate, because they can then use that to scare the bejesus out of people into making changes in their life. That's all this is.
And what they do, look, every weather event that occurs, they come out with a new attribution study within days, as if they've had time to do any kind of research or peer review, even search the literature, peer-reviewed literature, or check their data. They don't have time. No, we got to get the headlines. 2 days after the hurricane hits, a new attribution study came out analyzing that hurricane. That's unbelievable. Can't be done. Well, how? Of course it can be done. You run a computer model. You run a model with no human beings, and you run a model with human beings, but with super high emission rates, and then you compare the two, and you say, "Gosh, there's a huge difference." So we can attribute the difference to climate change. And we can do it because we got super fast computers, but it has nothing whatsoever to do with the reality or the data, because they just haven't had time in those attribution studies to study any of the reality or the data. They don't try. It's all imaginary. It's all made up. And yet this NPR story, as Linnea pointed out, I think the quote was, "We can say for sure," or something like that. I forget what the actual quote is. Now we can say for sure, or now we know based on. It's like, well, no, you don't.
Yeah. Well, and I often wonder if the writers, like if this NPR writer, because she's written quite a few stories like this, where, so I wonder if she actually knows that it's shaky science that they're doing here and she's just propagandizing, or if she legitimately does not look into where they got this data from or what the methodology is. I really think that one of the major problems in science reporting is that these reporters read like the press releases that are given by the scientists, and they read maybe the introductory or the summary paragraph at the beginning of the paper, and then they don't look at anything else. And oftentimes what you'll find is that the press releases that the scientists are giving do not reflect the actual findings of their research at all. They way over dramatize their findings, or they pull some kind of a conclusion that you just cannot get.
In that they follow the model of the IPCC, which puts out an executive summary written by politicians, which doesn't reflect the body of the literature in the document.
One of the ways they came up with that 97% of scientists agree that climate change is primarily anthropogenic.
It ended up being about 73 people.
Yeah, and it came just from purely reading the abstracts of papers. And then I think it was like if they mentioned climate change, they then said like, oh, it agrees with this point. And so many people came out and said, no, this is not at all what my paper said. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right on that.
Andy, I sent you a link to an article I wrote this week where Linnea was talking about, the press releases and the fact that reporters are not, sciencey enough to figure things out. Here's a case where the Guardian reported on a study that they produced a paper out of Ohio State University, and they made a press release saying that this is going to be published. And they didn't even have a link to the paper in it. And they got the date wrong. They couldn't even get the press release accurate. Seriously. But their whole thing has been about accurate beliefs. They basically say that if you publish the right kind of narrative, that will change people's belief systems. But then if they see something that is climate skeptical, well, that'll change it back. And the whole thing was basically just a hammer to say, we shouldn't allow anyone to publish anything that's skeptical. And yet, because, accurate science reporting is really what it's all about. And they couldn't even get the date or a link to the paper in their freaking press release out of Ohio State. How in the heck can they do that and talk about accuracy?
So essentially,
they weren't even talking about
you.
they weren't even talking about accurate facts. They were talking about accurate beliefs. And how you knew whether a belief is accurate is whether it buys into climate alarm.
I mean, the government disinformation board. That's how you know.
That's why many people say climate science has become a religion.
I think that's a fair point of view.
And this is something that I noticed, even when I was in high school or when I was getting really well educated on this subject. And not to be too flattering, but Anthony, your site was one of the first outlets that I came across that was climate skeptical in the slightest. Everything else was wrote however the government at that time, the Obama administration, wanted it to go. And I noticed right away that every report that would come out in the news that was talking about some new finding, you read the executive summary or something, and it'll be a little bit extreme, but then you read the actual research paper, or you read as much of it as you can understand as a tiny little high school student or college freshman. And you realize that they're way, way more cautious in the actual body of the paper with making any kind of claims, unless it's just totally trash paper. But a lot of times what I was finding was that throughout the paper, they were saying, we think that this might be what's implied here, but we have to caution ourselves. And, it might also be this and blah, 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 blah. But then in the executive summary or in the press release, it's totally, we discovered this. And we know for a fact that this is the case. And it's always been very interesting to me, because that to me feels like deception. That doesn't feel like, they just don't know better.
Yeah, well, science reporting, factual, boring, statistics, it doesn't sell newspapers. It doesn't, earn clicks. And so they have to amplify it to get interest. And that's what these outlets do, particularly The Guardian. They are masters of climate science amplification to the point of absurdity.
Yeah.
They really
though
do.
oddly enough, sorry, Anthony.
I think you're good, Sterling.
I was going to say, though oddly enough, a couple of weeks ago, when Linnea wrote a piece on colder than average temperatures in the Southern Hemisphere and South America and Australia, The Guardian was the only news source I saw that actually attributed it not to climate change, but to the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. So every so often, even The Guardian stumbles upon the truth and reports it.
And they really pulled that one out. They're working hard to connect the cold to PDO, and that instead of, trying to fit it into global warming like they usually do. Pretty funny.
I want to also reinforce something that Anthony was saying, and that, newspapers won't run boring data and stuff. Also, governments won't fund it. They'll only fund what their official narrative is. And the U.S. narrative, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, their narrative is that climate change is primarily anthropogenic and catastrophic. If you want funding, that is what you have to say, which I think just goes along with the whole media point. But all right, we are running up against the 44-minute mark here. I said we weren't going to go too long today. So it's about time we wrap it up. Anyone have any final comments before I do my awkward outro?
Willem says that Anthony should talk about your video archive.
TM Willens.
Oh, well, that's on What's Up With That. We have a new feature, actually 2 new features on What's Up With That. We have a video archive that shows some of the most popular climate videos out there. And these are from prominent scientists and skeptics and some lawmakers too, all in one place. And then we also have a new book review archive. So basically what we're coming up with here on What's Up With That is a one-stop shop where you can find all of the content about climate science in a skeptical way. And we also have the sub-website called Everything Climate, which talks about the pro and cons, where we talk about the arguments, it's getting warmer. This is the pro and this is why. And then we have the con saying, well, here's why it's getting warmer, but no, it's not a crisis. So we have that kind of a thing there. So yeah, at What's Up With That, we have a lot of new features coming around and more to come.
Cool. Anyone else have anything to plug before we wrap this up?
Oh, don't forget about my book.
Oh, Anthony's got plugs out the wazoo. No one else has anything.
Sorry. Don't forget Climate
good.
at a Glance. And what's cool about this is that once you buy this book, inside the cover, there is these codes where you can download a digital copy of the book that you can distribute to your friends, as well as a slideshow, a PowerPoint. So it's very
And we've got the
powerful.
website. And
Yeah.
we've got the website they can go to, and we've got Climate Realism and Climate Change Weekly, which I highly recommend you subscribe to.
It's
Not
almost
that
like
I
you
have
write
any.
it.
Yeah. I feel like Hunter Biden buying oil.
I like it. Any Hunter Biden reference I'm cool with. Well, thank you all for joining us for this week's God. That was going to totally go by my head until you all started laughing. I can't believe we just did that. Thank you all for joining this week's episode of Climate Change Roundtable. Join us every week on Friday at noon to get the non-mainstream or non-corporate, I'd rather say, view on climate change media. Not climate change media, climate change in the media. Outside of that, check out climaterealism.com. Check out the Climate at a Glance book. As Anthony said, I actually want to back up what he's saying, and I'm not just doing this because we're on the same show. It's a genuinely awesome book, and it really is helpful if you ever want to debate any of these issues with anyone. And it is hard to debate these issues with people because, as I think it was Anthony said, it's a religion, and people are highly emotional about it. So having actual facts on your side is essential. And if you want them, check out the Climate at a Glance book. Other than that, I got nothing else. All right. That's it. That's my awkward ending to the episode. We will catch you all next week. Peace.
Goodbye.